Hey y'all, it's Ryan. With Easter right around the corner, I thought today would be a wonderful day to draw a fun, funky, and festive Easter gnome. So grab your drawing tools and let's get to it. Before we start working on our fun and funky Easter gnome, we are going to get our canvas set up for our artwork. So the canvas size that I'm using is 3000 pixels by 3000 pixels. And then I'm also going to turn on my drawing guide, which is still found under my actions menu under canvas. I like using the grid or the 2D drawing guide because then it really helps me with size, proportions, and where on the screen I am. So lastly, I'm going to turn off my background and my gnome so that I have a clean slate to start sketching my gnome so that I can then go in and build on top of it with color. And then the pen that I'm using, the brush that I'm using is this dry ink brush, which is typically what I use for my sketches. So because he's gonna take up the majority of this canvas height-wise, I'm going to start with the top of his hat and work my way down. So I'm going to draw, let's say, here for the circle of his hat, and I'm going to hold my pencil and then push on the screen so that it forms a perfect circle for me. And then I'm going to continue with the left side of his hat. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. Draw the arch down. And then right here is about where I'm going to have that hat stop and curve back up and over to the other side. So I am going to add in that detail to show that kind of fold right here. And make the curve of my hat. Make that curved line up and over. I'm going to hold so that it snaps to for me. Continue that around. And now I'm going to work on drawing or building the right side of his hat and drawing that arc back up and over to connect with the ball on the end of his gnome hat. Now I do know that I am going to add bunny ears into his hat, but I can go back in. Because this is my sketch, I'm going to focus on just where I want this hat to sit first. And then I'll focus on erasing wherever I put his ears. So again, with another fold over here, I'm going to make that a little wider. Okay. And then his nose is going to sit right at the top. So again, draw that circle and then hold so it snaps to. All of this over here is going to be his beard. So really I need to draw his fingers, which I'm just going to draw 5 kind of oblong ovals. Because we're only seeing kind of his knuckles here as he's holding on to whatever he's holding on to. Okay, now I'm going to repeat that on my right hand side. starting about here. Again, just 5 ovals. For his fingers. All right, so we have the basic idea of where his hands are, where the hat is. Now I'm gonna come in and add the bunny ears to it. So I want his bunny ears to sit in the middle of, I want them to take up the middle of my canvas, so they'll really be here. So the bottom of my bunny ears are going to sit close to where I put these folds in his hat. So I'm gonna start by drawing kind of the crease of where they would be in his hat. That means I'm gonna have to erase. Let me go ahead and erase this one right here. And again, this is just the sketch getting it started, so it doesn't have to be clean or perfect. And then for his ear, I'm going to draw that curved line up. I'm gonna hold so that it snaps to for me, and then I'm going to just do the same thing coming back down until it meets this fold in his hat. Okay, and then I'm going to repeat that for the inside of his ear. So I can see that all of this right here in his hat is going to be erased. On the right hand side, I want his ear, instead of being standing straight up like his left one, I want it to be flopped over. So to draw that, I'm gonna start with the curved line going up just like I did here, but I'm only gonna go up about halfway, and I'm gonna stop. And then I'm going to continue that curve over off to the right. And I'm gonna bring it up to a point. And then I'm going to create that curved line coming back and stop so that again it snaps to for me. And then just like I did here, I'm going to continue from the bottom up until it meets the bottom of his folded ear over here. And then for the inside of his ear, like we did here, you're only going to see a U shaped. Oops. You're not going to see the entire inside color of the ear because it is folded over. So just like on this side, I'm going to go back in and erase all of that is behind his ears. All right, so now that I have my sketch done, I'm gonna start adding in my layers of color. Okay, so the first things that I'm going to work on color-wise, I'm going to do his hat because it is such a large piece of this artwork. So in my layers, I'm going to click the plus sign to add a new layer. And I really love this bright color blue or teal that we have over here. I think it's just very bright and very Easter-esque. So that is the color that I am going to pick. So I am going to change my brush to cotton, which in your brush library, that can be found under the organic brush set down closer to the bottom. I like using this brush because it gives it a nice textured feel to it. And I want that softness on his hat. So in my sketch, I'm gonna turn that sketch down, the opacity down, so that I can have an idea of where I'm drawing, but I'm not overpowered by the sketch layer. I'm gonna turn my pen size, my brush size down to, let's go with 4. And then I'm just gonna start outlining or tracing the entire hat. Because I'm going to build my ears on top of it, I don't need to really worry about stopping and picking back up. Turn that opacity up. Okay, now you can decide if you want to come in and turn the brush all the way up or turn it up more and color in. I like to pick a color that's slightly lighter than the color that I have, and then I'm going to drag it in to the hat. So that way I still get that break between my outline and my different lines that I have built into it, and the actual color that is filling up his hat. Okay, so on top of this layer, I am going to add a new one, and I'm going to draw the end of his hat. I'm going to select a bright white for that. Even though my background is set to white right now, I am going to go back in and change the background color a little bit, so I'll be able to see all of the details that I've added. So still using that cotton brush, I'm just going to color in, that circle for the end of his hat. All right, so his nose I'm going to do next. Come into my layers, click the plus sign. I am going to change my brush back to my dry ink. I'm going to select this darker, it's an orange color, but it's pretty nice when it comes to skin tone for things like this. So I'm going to draw that elongated oval. Drag and drop. I'm going to drag my pen over to try and fill in between the edge and his actual nose. Okay, I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to use the same color for his fingers. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and add that color by dropping. Then I'm gonna hit continue filling to change it to color drop. So I can quickly tap on his fingers to drop that color in. And then lastly, for just my blanket color, I'm gonna get his ears drawn in. So new layer on top. I am going to come in and turn the hat layer off so I can see where my ears are. Go back to bright white. Still using that dry ink brush. The only difference is I am going to close this so that I can fill that in. Okay, and then do the second ear. So now I can turn his hat layer back on. I have a good idea of where my ears are. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change my background color. I'm just going to darken it up a bit so I can clearly see where I am and what I'm working with, especially when it comes to his ears. This will not be the color that I choose or that I use at the end of the piece. It's just helping me right now. So the first detail that I'm going to add is going to be his beard right here. So in my layers, his beard needs to sit under basically everything. So I'm going to, in between my sketch layer and his hat, I'm going to click the plus sign. And then I'm going to come into my brushes, go down to materials, and I'm going to choose fine hair. Because I like the way that it gives that, it's very flowing, it's very natural looking, I'm going to use that as my base to build in that texture and that look of flowing hair for his beard. So I am going to start with a black as my base, and I am going to just start drawing in lines for his beard. Okay, so now I'm going to start adding in lighter shades. So I'm going to start by going up to a lighter gray. Still have that fine hair brush on. And I'm going to come in and start filling it in with a little bit of salt and pepper, that gray, and then that white. This just really adds in a nice look and dimension to the piece and to my little gnome guy. Okay, I'm gonna come in and go up one step lighter. And I've actually split, so his hair is going two different directions. So I'm curving it towards the left on his left side and towards the right on his right side, so that it looks just a little bit more natural. And then finally, I'm going to select pure white and add just a few streaks here and there of the white, because I don't want it to overpower the dark gray and the black that I have in there. Okay. Now, I usually come into my smudging tool and select fine hair, and I'll smudge some of this together so that it just blends a little bit more, so it's not clear, perfect, fine lines of hair. It looks a little bit more natural and kind of swept together. If you don't want to do that, that's totally up to you. I just like the softness that it creates. It's not harsh lines showing his hair. All right, so there's his beard built. Now we're going to work on the inside of his ears. So in my layers, I'm going to find that ear layer, click the plus sign, tap on the layer and select clipping mask. For this, I'm going to select a light pink and change my pen back to dry ink. And just like I did with the outline of his ears, I'm going to create those curved lines to form the ear to follow the outline. Drag that in. And then with this ear, I'm actually going to come into my sketch layer, turn that up and turn the ear layer off and turn his hat layer off so I can see where I'm drawing for the inside of this ear. And connect it, drag to fill. Now I can come back into my layers, turn those layers back on, turn my sketch back down, and there we have his ears. Next up, I'm going to do shading on his nose and his fingers. So first I'm going to find his nose layer, click the plus sign to add a layer above, select that layer and select clipping mask. In my colors, I'm going to select this light orange to add highlights to his nose. So first I'm going to put highlights on just the outside on the left hand of his nose. Still using that dry ink brush. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a second clipping mask in between them. I'm going to change my color back to the original. On this clipping mask, I'm going to set the blending mode to multiply. What that will do is it will actually darken it for me. Then I can come into this layer, my dark layer, with my smudging tool set to dry ink, and I can smudge this layer until I get it looking how I want for his nose. I'm going to do the same with my lightened layer on that clipping mask. And then I'm going to come in and merge those two layers together. So I'm going to keep on working my smudging tool until I get it looking how I want it for his nose and for the highlights and shadows. Okay, it's getting there. Okay, now I'm going to come into his fingers and I'm going to copy that process on his hands. First, I'm actually going to come into my actions and turn off my drawing guide so I can see a little bit better down here. So find his fingers layer, add a layer above it, turn that into a clipping mask. And I'm going to select the lighter color. And this will also help me to kind of distinguish between his fingers. Okay, and then again, add that clipping mask. Set it to multiply. Now on this layer, I'm gonna see Now on this clipping mask, instead of using the smudge tool like I did on his nose, I'm actually going to come into my adjustments and select blur and set that blur up to 5%. So that way it lightens that shadow on it. Then I can come into the lighter layer and use the smudge tool to just blend those two together. And I am pressing really lightly on my screen with my pencil, just so that way I'm not smudging too much, putting too much pressure on it. It's just enough to move that lighter color around a little bit and blend it in to that blurred, darker color that I have for the shadow. All right. Next up, I'm gonna add a shadow here where his ear is flopped over, just to show that separation between the top of his ear here and the inside of his ear. So I'm gonna add a new layer. I'm gonna select this as a clipping mask. I'm gonna come into my brushes and go to my airbrushing. Make sure I have soft brush selected. I'm gonna turn it down to about 2 and select black. And then from here, I'm gonna find that crease and just lightly add that shadow. Now, because it's a clipping mask on his whole ear, it is actually on top right here of his ear. So I'm gonna come in and clean that up with an eraser after I add a blur to it. Okay. So come back in with my eraser. I am gonna set my eraser to the same of the soft brush, but I'm gonna do the soft airbrush, so it's a little sharper. I'm gonna turn that down to 3. I'm just gonna follow the line of his ear, hold so that it snaps for me, and then erase everything above that line. And then here, I actually need to erase down right there. So now it makes a clean line where the top of his ear is and that shadow is. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use the smudge tool on his hat. So I'm going to smudge where the darker blue meets this lighter blue, just so you don't see that line of where the two meet. So in my layers, I'm going to select his hat layer, select my smudge tool, and I'm going to make sure I have it set to cotton. I'm going to turn that down to about 2. So wherever those two meet, I am just going to come in with my smudge tool, and I am just going to lighten up the division between the two. So I still have my darkened lines where my shadows are for the folds in the hat, but you cannot really see where I drew with one pen and then I just did the fill. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple things, because here where I smudge, now you can see his hair through his hat, and I don't want that. So I'm going to come back into my colors, select that light blue, make sure my brush is back on cotton, and I am just going to fill in right here. So you can't see through his hat. But I still have that nice texture of that cotton. Now, if you would like the folds to be more pronounced, here's what I would suggest. So I'm going to color over them a little bit so I can show you. So I would come back in with a dark gray, go back to that soft airbrush, and I would lightly draw in creases and shadows of his hat. And then here with his ears as well. And it just adds that depth to the image that we didn't have before. So you can add more detail into the hat if you would like.
But I'm going to add a fun and funky background that looks more like an Easter egg design.
So for the background, instead of it being gray, I'm going to, between my sketch layer and all my other layers that are my gnome, I'm going to add a new layer. And then I am going to select this really funky bright pink. And I am going to click the layer and select fill layer. Now, that's aggressive, so I am going to layer in some other colors with it. So on top of this layer, I'm going to click the plus sign. You can see that I have harmony selected, so it tells me what color pairs with the pink that I have. So I'm going to select that kind of tealish blue. I am going to use my Monoline brush for this, and I am going to draw kind of that zigzag chevron color or pattern, across my screen, and then fill it. And I am just going to continue that. did not snap like I wanted. There we go. Okay. Right. I can go one step further and add a little bit of yellow. Lastly, I'm going to add some white. Okay, so by doing this background, I'm going to add in more color to the top of his hat here. So again, you can't see through it. So coming back to that hat layer, selecting that light blue, making sure I have my brush set to cotton. Just filling in that hat, and then same thing with the ball on the end of it. I'm going to change my brush back to Monoline. I'm going to draw a circle in the center of it and then fill it so that it is completely filled in, and then I can still get that cotton texture on the outside. Okay. The last detail that I'm going to add is a shadow to his hat. So on the right hand side, I'm going to add a darker shadow over here just to add that look and a little bit more to this image. So within that hat layer, add a new layer, select clipping mask on it. I'm going to turn the blend mode down to multiply. Make sure I have that blue set. And I'm back on my cotton brush. I am going to turn this brush size up to about 8, and just around the outside of the hat, I'm going to draw in that shadow. Let's go with the darker blue. There we go. A little bit more obvious that there's a shadow there using that darker blue. Okay, once I have that shadow drawn in, come up to my adjustments and select blur. And I'm going to blur that up to, let's say, 16%. And it creates that nice gradient, that nice blur for me. The last thing I would do is I'm going to select all of my gnome layers. I'm going to select the top one by clicking on it. Then I'm going to swipe to the right on each layer below that and select group. So now I have them all in one group and I can move them all at the same time. I'm going to move him down just a smidge so that he actually looks like he's now peeking out from the bottom of this bright, colorful background that we have. And if you want to take it a step further, you can duplicate the whole group. Click on it and click flatten to create an image. So now there I have a flattened image of my Easter gnome with our funky Easter background.
Thank you so much for drawing with me today. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and click the bell so that you're notified when new videos are posted. Hope to see you soon.